There are people in this industry who don't sing, don't produce, and don't stand in front of any camera, but somehow everything still moves through them. Tours, contracts, entire careers. You've probably never heard their names, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Because the ones who stay on top, the ones who never fall off, they've all passed through the same hands. They call it prayer to make it sound clean, but it's not. It's about knowing when to show up, when to bow your head, when to bleed. Some do it in churches, some inside sealed studios, some behind glass with no sound, just a room full of people pretending not to look. And once you've seen it, and not believe the performance, or the story they sell you, you're already marked. Especially if you were never supposed to be in that room in the first place. And if you're watching this right now, has it ever crossed your mind how many of them never actually fall off? Like they are always above the music industry scandals. And no matter how much evidence you gather about them, it seems irrelevant. Comment where you're watching from if you've ever wondered how some celebrities are worshipped. And subscribe if you still think there's more behind all of this than we've been allowed to know. We've built a culture around idolizing people we don't actually know. I'm talking about the big names. Eminem, Jay-Z, Megan Thee Stallion, Doja Cat, Beyonce. We argue over them, copy their hair, echo their words like gospel. But the closer you get to the machinery behind it all, the harder it is to believe any of it's real, especially when you start seeing how much is curated, not just by managers or teams, but by something older, quieter, and far more intentional than branding. Most people only see the tours, the polished speeches, the curated motherhood glow. They look at Beyonce like she cracked the code, like she built her own throne and stayed clean doing it. But I've worked around her long enough to know that image isn't built on talent alone. I was pulled in to handle patch calibration for her Parkwood East facility. Nothing special on paper, just 3 days of software updates and lighting diagnostics. Except the setup was all wrong. No crew briefings, no equipment tags. My badge didn't have a name or department listed, just a number and a floor assignment printed in red. Nobody gave me floor plans. Nobody asked questions. It was a job that paid high and came with silence. I didn't notice anything off until I scanned into the wrong level and the system let me through. Normally that throws an error or you get flagged at the gate, but the scanner lit green and the door clicked open without resistance. I figured maybe there was a back-end override because of the last-minute hardware drop, so I went in thinking I was still on track. That floor was different. No crates, no marked gear, no sound crew, just a long hallway with dim lighting and a low vibration coming from the vents. At the end, a door sat partially open with a chalk mark drawn across it, 3 intersecting circles smudged by hand like it had been reapplied more than once. I paused, but nothing about the setup said restricted, so I stepped inside. The room was blacked out and padded, no rigging, no staging, no technical gear in sight. In the center, under a soft overhead light, stood a square glass frame, waist height, filled with curled pages arranged in rows. They weren't scripts or blueprints. They looked aged, stained around the edges, like they'd been exposed to heat or smoke. And the names on them weren't stage names. They were legal, full, documented. That's when I saw her, Beyonce, already standing there in the middle of the room, facing the glass, completely still. No assistant, no manager, no lighting techs nearby. One of her hands was at her side, while the other hung open, and from the center of her palm, blood was dripping slowly onto the floor. She wasn't in wardrobe. She wasn't moving. She wasn't blinking. She was just present in a way that made the entire space feel older than it looked. I started to back out when I realized we weren't alone. 4 others were in that room, silent, spread along the walls in equal distance from the center. One was crouched with a metal bowl in their lap, stirring something dark and thick, while another leaned against the far panel, barefoot, arms folded, a faint gray mark drawn onto their skin just below the neck. None of them looked at me, and none of them said a word. They weren't startled. They weren't surprised. It was like they had accounted for me before I even arrived. I didn't run. I didn't ask. I closed the door behind me as softly as I could and walked straight to the elevator, hoping the badge wouldn't throw red on the way down. It didn't. When I got back to the main floor, everything was moving again. Crews running, calls being made, patch tests halfway through implementation. But I wasn't on the sheet anymore. The project lead wouldn't return my messages. The crew chief I knew was unreachable. I left that night thinking I'd follow up the next morning, only to find my hotel key deactivated, my reservation pulled from the system, and my email login marked invalid. I wasn't fired, I wasn't warned. I was simply gone. Not flagged, removed. And that's when it clicked. That room wasn't a mistake. That badge didn't glitch. They gave me just enough access to step through and realize what I was never meant to speak about. I didn't try to get back in. I knew whatever that was, it wasn't something you circled twice. But I couldn't let it go either. I kept replaying the layout of the room in my head. The way they were positioned, how her hand hung there, how no one looked at me like a person, more like a time marker, like I'd entered on cue. By morning, the rest of my assignments had vanished. Every login returned an error. The tech lead still hadn't responded, and by noon the Parkwood calendar removed the entire job from the week's build log, like the crew had never been booked. I still had the paper copy they gave me on day one, but the dates had changed. Not scratched out or manually corrected, just rewritten in a cleaner font, as if it was always meant to say something different. When I ran the barcode on the corner of the page through my own scanner, it came up registered to a different project entirely. Something archived, pre-2020, with no artist listed and no region tagged. That's when I knew it wasn't a reschedule. They had overwritten the job's metadata and left everything else in place so no one would notice the gap, not even the crew. That night, I tried to log into the backup drive I keep off network for my lighting profiles. That folder was gone too. The hard drive worked, everything else was there, just not that one directory. I went into the system logs and saw it had been accessed 12 hours earlier, right around the time I left the compound. Whoever scrubbed it didn't touch anything else. They didn't flag the drive or damage the contents. They just removed the folder tied to Parkwood, like it had never been uploaded in the first place. I called a guy I knew from a prior tour, someone who'd worked production for artists tied to the same network. I didn't say her name. I just asked if he'd ever been to Parkwood East. He paused for a second too long, then said no and hung up. An hour later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Do not call anyone else." Not about this. I was staying at a hotel they booked for us 2 blocks from the facility. The key card I was issued stopped working, and the reservation had been reassigned. The same girl who checked me in now said she had no record of me ever being there. When I handed over my ID to check, it didn't trigger a flag, didn't show any errors, it just failed to bring up a single result. No charge tied to my name, no room listed in the logbook, no date matched in their system. I wasn't declined or blacklisted. I had simply been cleared out like I'd never checked in at all. The next morning I got to the airport early and pulled up my travel itinerary. The airline had no flight listed under my confirmation number. No email trail, no booking code, no matching reference anywhere in their system. I checked my bank to verify the charge and saw that it had reversed overnight. Not because of a decline or expiration, but because the vendor had rejected it directly from their end. I didn't panic until I tried calling my main client line and heard someone else's voice on the voicemail greeting. I checked the number twice and even redialed, but the voicemail still played the wrong name. My number had been reassigned and the mailbox now belonged to someone else. It wasn't an identity theft situation or some network glitch. The number had been recycled, the line migrated, and there was no trace left that it had ever belonged to me. I drove out to Queens to visit someone I trusted. Another tech who had stepped away from the circuit after walking off a major tour a few years back. I didn't explain what happened, didn't bring up names, and didn't ask any questions. I just told him I'd seen something. He looked at me, stood there for a second, and said, "You saw the blood, didn't you?" He told me 3 things. 1, don't leave through a commercial route. 2, don't try to report anything, not through the label, not through the union, not through a friend. And 3, check everything they gave me. If I was marked, I still had time, but not much, and only if I moved before they finished erasing the rest. I went back to my car, pulled the badge holder from my glove box, and peeled back the laminate they'd sealed across the back. Under the sticker, burned into the plastic, was a red imprint, a triangle with 2 circles set at the base and a vertical line running clean through the center. It hadn't been there the day I got it. It matched the chalk on the door. And it meant I wasn't just seen, I'd been logged into whatever system that room belonged to. I didn't start digging to understand it. I did it because things were missing. My name, my access, my files. I went through every backup I had from the job, found a few folders that shouldn't have still been there. They weren't in plain view. Someone had renamed them and tucked them behind old fixture settings, but they hadn't deleted everything. That's where I found the video. It wasn't rehearsal. There was no crew, no staging, no audio feed. Just a static overhead shot of the same room I walked into. The camera was locked to one angle in the corner. The timestamp matched the day I was on site. At first, the room sits empty, light humming above the glass unit. Then Beyonce walks in. She moves slowly, not like someone rehearsing, but like someone responding to something they've done before. She stands in front of the unit, hands low, posture locked. A few minutes pass, and 3 more people enter. 2 of them take opposite corners. The third steps behind her, holding a bowl. No one speaks. No one turns. Every move happens with the kind of timing that doesn't come from direction. It comes from practice. One of them presses their hand to the unit. The overhead light shifts, and her head tilts back. That arrangement didn't feel new. I'd seen it somewhere, buried in a reference document from a past install tied to Black is King. I went through my old stills and found the file. It mapped out an identical formation, labeled Inheritance Formation, with the same shape, same figure layout, same entry spacing. I used to think it was artistic framing, but this was a ritual design plan dressed as a visual concept. The footage from that room didn't resemble it. It matched it. That document wasn't creative direction. It was replication. I opened a backup from a job I worked in Los Angeles a few years back. Different client. No active tour. No public project. Just a temporary lighting correction that didn't make sense at the time. Tucked inside the system logs was a scan diagram labeled Succession Tier 4C. And at the bottom of the page was a full name I didn't recognize. Until I saw the last name match the artist. The diagram matched exactly. Same structure. Same type of security stamp as the one printed on my badge. Same pattern in the access logs. It was the same layout, just tied to a different building in a different year. I kept pulling scan records from previous installs. 3 names came up across multiple systems tied to Beyonce's bigger projects. 2 were connected to Lemonade and again on Black is King. The third showed up on the credentialing backend for the Grammys. None of them are public-facing. But every time their names appear in access logs, something major happens. A shift in visibility, a new rollout, someone disappearing, someone stepping forward. The pattern isn't artistic, it's timed. Then I found a strange entry. No full name, just the initials, I. Carter. It was scanned into the building 2 hours before the room was accessed and logged out right before the door sequence triggered again. No job title, no team code. The birth date field had been blacked out, but the access badge metadata matched mine down to the line. Blue Ivy had been scanned in that day. She wasn't listed on staff. She wasn't visible. but she was present, and her entry shows up alongside the internal marker used during the session. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of the timeline. The room wasn't about Beyonce standing alone. It was set up with her daughter logged just outside the perimeter. That wasn't a rehearsal space. It was a structure built to carry over whatever still needed to be held before she passed it on. And when I walked in, they didn't react. They didn't move, because it was already in motion. I only found it because I was trying to delete every copy of the install logs I'd saved. I'd already wiped my phone and cleared my badge records from the cloud. When I opened one of the backup folders I'd kept from a job 6 months earlier, there was a directory I didn't recognize. It was hidden inside a recycled access pass I'd pulled from a different project. I opened it and saw 27 entries, all in the same format. Code names, birth months, rollout windows, and remarks I'd never seen before. Some said dropped, some said moved, and others had no label at all, just red slashes where names used to be. I started checking the dates with known album launches and press runs. One of them lined up with Megan Thee Stallion's rollout, another with Chloe and Hal's delayed drop. A third didn't match anything I knew, but the timestamp was recent, just 2 weeks earlier, and the remark next to it didn't say dropped or moved. It said, cleared for transfer. These weren't session logs. They were assignments. It looked like a queue of people moved through the same process, tied to the same studio sites, passed through the same handlers, and scrubbed from the record right after. And the deeper I searched, the more connections I saw. There were names I recognized, not public names, but internal ones. People who appeared across jobs I'd done over the years. They'd show up with different artists in different cities, but always carried the same security tier. There were other details too. Not all of them were artists. Some of the names buried in my archived logs weren't tied to performances or promo teams. They were operational. I remembered one in particular, a rep who never showed up on surface credits, but kept appearing behind rollout builds. He moved between Rihanna, Doja, and a handful of others that either burned out or vanished before they peaked. He wasn't in the file, but the artists he handled, every one of them was same badge tier, same clearance key, same handler ID I'd seen during the Beyonce build. And the company behind him wasn't a label or management team. It was an architecture firm out of Zurich that quietly handled structural overhauls on blacked out stages, unlisted venues, and underground studios that never made it to the official blueprints. It started to click then. This wasn't about Beyonce. She wasn't the center. She was part of a much longer chain. The process had been running before her and would keep going long after. And what I had on my device wasn't a leak or an accident. It was a live rotation file, updated every quarter. You didn't just get picked, you got replaced. Someone went missing, and someone else moved in to take their place. There were other entries that locked this in. I found a line that listed 3 initials for every code: original, carrier, and successor. One of them hit me hard: AL born 1979. Chain ended 2001. No handoff until 2 years later. Next carrier listed BK. That wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a theory. It was a transaction buried in a file, not meant to surface. Another line had a familiar date with no known name, but the carrier ID was tied to Stefani Germanata. The remark beside it read, confirmed post-merge. That wasn't coincidence. That was scheduling. This wasn't about talent or momentum or branding. This was a rotation of faces. Some lasted, some didn't, but all of them were slotted into a system that kept moving whether they agreed to it or not. The last line stopped me. It was my code, the one from my install badge, flagged, timestamped, and duplicated into a remark field that had never been there before. It said, "Unauthorized trace present, awaiting close." I hadn't been erased yet, but I was now part of the file. I logged into the system one last time. Not because I thought it was safe, but because I needed to know if any trace of me still existed. My badge credentials were gone. That wasn't surprising. What I didn't expect was that the ID itself was still active. Same tag, same tier, same clearance logs. But the location wasn't New York anymore. It was Los Angeles. The new site was tied to an install for another A. List artist with a global rollout coming next quarter. The timestamp started 2 weeks ago, right around the time I noticed my VPN began glitching and 2 of my encrypted folders wouldn't open anymore. It wasn't an error. Someone else was using my credentials. And from the system's view, that person was me. I checked the access logs. They matched the build I did for Beyonce 2 years earlier. Same studio layout, same floor wiring, same type of backdoor server patch. I had to rig under the table because no official contractor was allowed inside the chamber. I remembered every second of that job. And now, every action I took had been lifted and reinserted under a new date, marked as if it was happening now. That install wasn't just duplicated. It was being repeated. Same process, same silence, new subject. I tried to flag it. The site admin told me the badge had already been updated by the owner. When I asked how that was possible, he said the request came from the verified number on file. It was my number. I had it disconnected 3 weeks ago. The email tied to my old contract no longer existed. The backups I tried to pull from my offline vault showed modified dates that didn't match the last time I opened them. Some had new metadata. The installer name was replaced. The timestamps were changed. One of the files even said it had been last accessed yesterday. I hadn't opened anything in days. It wasn't deletion anymore. It was substitution. Step by step, part by part, everything I touched was being rewritten. The builds I completed, the reports I filed, the signatures I left on each location, they were all being covered by someone else acting under my name. I even found a new user photo on the backup login page for a system I used in Texas last fall. It wasn't my face, but it was wearing my work jacket. The one that was taken when my last storage unit got emptied out without notice. That was the moment I understood this had gone too far. I wasn't watching them clean up a leak. I was watching them install a new version of me, one that would never speak, never look back, and never raise a single question. The system didn't just want me gone. It wanted to keep everything I knew, but cut me out of the picture. I called a contact at a service provider I once freelanced for. He answered with a voice I didn't recognize. When I asked for the supervisor who used to run the team, he told me she'd been retired for 6 months. That wasn't possible. She had messaged me on Signal just last month, warning me to stop checking the Zurich bill logs. I asked if her account was still active. He said the platform was never part of their protocol. That team, according to him, never existed. So I checked my own file. A system ping came back blank. The work history was gone. The tax record was cleared. The last address on file was one I never lived in, and the passport status showed a renewal request I never filed. When I clicked to report a breach, the support page froze, then returned an error saying I was not authorized to proceed. I had never felt that level of pressure before. Not fear, not panic, just something deeper. The moment you realize it's not just your career they're wiping, it's your presence, your footprint, your memory. The system wasn't trying to shut me down. A lot more dreadful things have happened to me since the ritual I saw done on Beyonce. So many that I can't even count anymore. Sometimes it's strange messages in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's my front door wide open when I know I locked it. But most days, it's just people watching me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, until I started seeing the same gray car parked 3 blocks away, no matter where I stayed. At the gas station, at the grocery store, even once outside the mall bathroom. I changed routes, changed phones, stayed in different places. It didn't stop. They just got quieter about it. I haven't slept in my real apartment in weeks. I moved between 2 places now, neither in my name. I don't carry my personal phone when I go out. I only use my bank card when I have no choice. I make calls from public phones. That's how bad it's gotten. And now, I know I have only one option left: to leave. I won't be able to come back. I won't see my family. I already told them not to call. They're safer if no one connects us. I've cut every trace of where I am. If I make it out, I'll vanish for real. Because staying here isn't safe anymore. That ritual, it wasn't a show. It wasn't practice. It wasn't something for the fans or for press coverage. What I saw was real. It was done with intent. Recorded, cleaned up, hidden. And it wasn't for the public. It was for her and for them. The ones who keep this whole thing running. The worst part is how normal everything looks. The smiles, the tour dates, the documentaries. I used to think that was all surface. Now I know it's cover. You think someone who controls cameras, lights, streaming deals, and global tour routes can't erase one worker. I'm not special. I was just there at the wrong moment. But when I remember the room, the chanting, the movements, the clothes, it matches things I've seen in other jobs. Black is King wasn't just a project. It was a plan. The symbols, the set layouts, the color sequences, they weren't random. They were built to repeat something old, something passed down, hidden in plain sight. The real things happen behind sealed doors, under locked stages, inside soundproof basements no one on the crew even knows about. You'd be surprised how many artists think they're in charge, until they miss one fine print, or they sign without reading. That's when it starts. And if you've ever wondered why some of them vanish or start acting strange, or speak out too much before going quiet, it's not just exhaustion. Sometimes it's because they saw something they were never meant to. Just like I did. It had already decided who would take my place. Beyonce was never the end point. She was the foundation. What started with her is now embedded in everything that moves through the system. The music videos, the rituals, the team formations, the way stages are designed to follow a pattern. It's all been shaped around her. Nothing from that room was removed. It was copied, used in other buildings, rebuilt under new names. The lights, the soundproofing, the symbols on the wall, all still in use, just hidden better now. Every time a new artist launches, with a spiritual theme, or a ritual-based image, or a sudden shift in tone, the same layout shows up, the same color choices, the same symbols behind the press shoots. It's not influenced, it's instruction. And now Blue Ivy's name is showing up in design folders, in creative decks, on staff emails. Her rollout is being built from the same structure, the same layouts, the same direction, even the set plans match. They're not introducing her. They're continuing the work. This isn't about a brand or a career. It's a system of passage. One person finishes, another one steps in. That's how this place works. You don't have to believe in anything. You just have to do the job. The cameras will roll, the team will clap, and the rooms will stay closed. Because what started with her, it never ended. And it's not just running, it's expanding. Comment if you think there's more to why Blue Ivy keeps showing up while Beyonce stays just out of frame. Could be nothing, or it could be exactly what it looks like. If you felt any of this, like it, share it, and subscribe, so you don't miss what comes next. Because whatever they're planning, it's already moving.